We have this context that if you've extracted these entities around your data, we can pull them into the RAG context. We can say, well, here's the subgraph, essentially, related to all the sources that you've pulled in, throw that metadata into the prompt as well.
Welcome to episode 25 of Tool Use, the weekly conversation about helpful AI tools that you can use today, brought to you by Enetic. I'm Mike Bird, talking Ty Fierro, and this week we're talking all about Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG. We're joined by Kirk Marple, the founder and CEO of Graphlit. Kirk, welcome to Tool Use.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Happy to be here.
We're super excited to have you, and I guess we can just kind of jump into it. We normally start off just kind of talking about your background, so I'm curious how you got into AI and curious how you got into RAG and kind of what your story is thus far.
Yeah, I mean, a career software developer. As you said, we started in Seattle, so I'm an old Microsoftie from back in the day. I have always kind of been around the media software space, actually, and so had a company for about a dozen years after Microsoft in the video transcoding space. So we sold to like ESPN and Fox and people like that. But there's a lot of similarities between that kind of unstructured data concept of video and audio, and now what people talk about unstructured data from, Slack messages and audio Zoom recordings and things like that. So it's kind of been this thread through my career. And after selling my last company, I kind of had to find something else that I was passionate about. And we started 4 years ago in this space as being like a data cataloging tool for unstructured data, pre-RAG, pre-LLM. And it's kind of dovetailed into like, okay, this is a perfect fit for what we're doing now.
Actually, would you mind giving us a little overview of Graphlit?
Yeah, so we describe ourselves as a RAG as a service platform. The real point of that is I always say there's kind of a funnel of data that you got to start with, and that's files from Google Drive, Slack messages, email, Jira tickets. We can take anything and parse that out into a textual format, even things like audio transcription. And then the retrieval side is really the search. And so, okay, how do you search over it? How do you organize the data? We're based on a knowledge graph architecture. And so we're a bit different than some folks where it's not just text search or not just embedding search, but there's other sort of parameters there. And then there's the whole RAG side of the conversations that we offer. And that's where people get an API. They can essentially have like a ChatGPT kind of experience. But then the next place we're having is agent workflows and things like that, which we can talk about as much.
Fascinating. Yeah. Okay. I think for some of our audience likes to kind of understand things at the basic level. So I'm kind of curious if you can kind of just explain what RAG is and kind of like why it's important in this day and age.
Yeah. There's been a lot of talk of, as LLMs, as you know, they have to take a textual prompt. And so that's, if you think of it as simple input and output, you have to format that prompt in a way that you get the right response back. And so to me, I take a much more kind of broad stroke approach of, okay, what is the R in RAG? So it's in the retrieval. So you have to query data from somewhere. And I saw this great talk last weekend of this guy was like, look, there's all these acronyms for like different flavors of RAG, and you can pretty much pick and choose. I sort of say like, it's all just RAG. And so it's you're retrieving data from somewhere, and that can be a typical search. And you're either searching by text, you're searching by similarity to the user prompt. There's even things like search by date, search by geofence. You can think about all of that to me as just the R, the retrieval in RAG. And then what you get is you get a list of sources. You say, okay, here's what I think is relevant to the user's question. From that point, there's this kind of like compilation process of how do you take this list of sources and make it into a prompt that you can literally just copy and paste into ChatGPT. And that a lot of times you call your RAG pipeline, and we call it like our prompt compiler. And that's a lot of where the secret sauce is how many sources do you put in? Are you taking just the chunks that were hit from the search, or are you expanding it like to the full page or the full content? And we can go in detail on that, but that process to me of you're retrieving data, you're kind of formatting it for the LLM, you're handing it to the LLM, and then taking the response and then storing the history of it. And so that's another part of it of like with when OpenAI came out with their Assistance API, essentially it's conversation history. And that's a lot of the kind of thing, we'd already been doing where you're storing the history. And then when you follow up on a message, we automatically put that back in to the LLM. So there's a lot of that too.
Excellent. Appreciate the explanation. There's always been a bit of a back and forth going on the internet around RAG versus long context models.
Yep.
And I'd love to get your thoughts on how you view long context models, something that benefits with RAG, something that will replace RAG. Where does it fit in the overall flow?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting thing. I mean, of how some people just think, oh, it's going to kill RAG or whatever, and I really take the opposite approach, where it's just giving you more, it's giving you a wider berth to put data into the LLM. But there, I mean, I can come up with a reason in like 2 seconds of why you still need retrieval. It's like, okay, I'm searching my email, but how do you search on the email in the last 7 days? Like, even if you have, I mean, a million token context window, you still have to do retrieval to figure out the right data to put into the prompt. And so, I mean, I think they work great together. I mean, it's peanut butter and jelly. Like, I mean, I don't think there's really anything bad about it. I mean, one or the other. It just is I mean, it's actually a great thing to have that many tokens. It lets you do a lot more things, which I think, I mean, you're getting a wider berth of data that you can then analyze. But I think they're both have their own, they can coexist.
I think what's kind of interesting about the long context models is like, we even have just models now that can do like 128K, and I have access to those. And when I do coding tasks, like I could paste in dozens of files that have nothing to do with my actual prompt just to give it more context or whatever. But I don't. I try to give it the most relevant pieces that are necessary for the job at hand. And so even though it can have this larger context window, I feel like RAG can kind of come into play here to where it just gets the best pieces of context, because you don't want to just add things that aren't contributing anything to it, because it just gives it more to chew through. So I think there's definitely still a place for RAG, and I think there are peanut butter and jelly, like you're saying. One question I have that's like a genuine question I have as I build AI products is, doing RAG systems, chunking is such a hard thing for me to wrap my head around, because there's like, all right, do you just chunk it every 1,000 characters? I've heard of like semantic chunking, where you chunk like by headings in a markdown, for example, but I'm very lost at it. And every time I go and research more, there's like reasons to do one and not the other. How do you think about chunking, and like what's the right way to approach that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think, I mean, some people are so focused on getting the right chunk size and hyper analyzing, like, okay, it has to be the right thing. I think what we've seen is, I mean, there's a couple approaches. I mean, you can really refine the chunk size for your data and say, okay, look, I'm having semantic sections, which may be like, okay, a chapter, or, I mean, it is like I don't know, like a contract might have like a table of contents. And so you're essentially chunking by the table of contents. I mean, that can be useful, but I mean, how are you going to know if it's 500 tokens or 600 tokens or 800 tokens? It's really the right thing for it. We take a bit of a different approach, where we're saying, look, I mean, we have a good kind of default chunk size. I think it's 600 tokens, and then with, I believe, 25% overlap. And so we essentially say, okay, that's your default. We get a sort of happy medium. But then what we focus on is retrieval expansion. And so really the way I look at it is, I mean, the vector embedding and the vector search, you're just kind of like trying to grab onto data in the database and say, okay, like, what is similar enough? It really doesn't care where in the text it finds it. Like, you're not even, I mean, looking for that. You're just trying to say, okay, I know that there's something similar here. And you do want to be a bit liberal with that, because, I mean, you don't want to miss things. And so then by stacking up things, we can talk about this later, but it's like re-ranking. I think then if you say, well, look, I'm just gonna chunk it in a way. You can create like summary chunks, and there's different other approaches for that. But then it's make sure to re-rank it on the post retrieval side. So then you're really getting the bias of the most relevant stuff. But also what you can do is you can then expand those chunks to the surrounding page level or chapter level or different things like that. And we offer a bunch of different options for that. And that's where we really see the value of that. Chunk may not matter. I mean, it may have just been something you could get its hooks into a little bit, but it's really, I mean, if you just say, okay, any chunk you find in that chapter, just expand it to the chapter and then hand the chapter to the LLM. And that actually works great. I mean, for a lot of cases. So you're not putting the bias on having the right chunk. You're just saying, if any chunk in here fits, just go to the bigger section that we know is kind of semantically right, that surrounds it. And with the
Very cool.
with the larger context windows, obviously this works really well too.
Absolutely. And would the like orientation of the chunk within a chapter be part of the metadata, or could you actually go into the metadata of vector embeddings a bit? What would be helpful to add to it, or is it very case by case? Or
That's a great question. So we had sort of a hybrid model. This is kind of one of our secret sauce areas of it's a hybrid of a vector database, a graph database, and a kind of JSON document store. So the metadata is kept in the JSON format. The vector embeddings are pretty much just the vector embeddings. There is some metadata we capture around it, but we don't currently put metadata in the embedding, like the text that gets embedded itself. We've tried it, but the problem is you can get a lot of false positives, where like if you have a word or some text of like, hey, this is an audio file, and you put that in every embedding, anytime you search for the word audio, you're going to find everything. And so we ended up backing away from going down that road of putting too much metadata in that. I do think there's interesting things of like putting summaries or putting, other sort of textual things around it can sometimes help, but you also have to worry about false positives of putting too much common things that are going to be hit too easily.
Interesting. You touched on re-rankers, and I've seen kind of what Cohere's done with that, and heard a little bit about it on Twitter. But past that, I don't have a really good grasp of what that is, other than grab some chunks and then re-rank them to figure out which ones are the best. But can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think if you think about the vector search, it's just looking for relevance. So you have an input piece of text, and you have a whole bunch of chunks that have had embeddings created from them. And it's just trying to find similarity. Now, similarity doesn't mean relevance necessarily. It's just like, okay, I'm typing something about what is Microsoft stock on this day. It's a similarity is going to mean I'm going to find everything that mentions Microsoft and stock and all those chunks. But then say you have data that comes back from web scraping, from Slack messages, from, whatever PDFs of their 10K or whatever. And that comes back, relevance is then what lets you sort that. And so really where I think, they work really well together, where one is kind of like, okay, I'm just going to grab as much data that I think is relevant as possible. And then the re-ranker is tuned for taking the same input prompt, and then you just have a subset of sources that you've covered from the chunks, which could have been now expanded. And then you say, okay, now what do you think is the most relevant? And then it gives you another metric that you can threshold on. It automatically sorts it. And they're really fast. They're tuned for this. So it's just milliseconds, that you're adding on to your RAG pipeline. And then what we do is we then take that, and now we have a list of what we feel is relevant sources, and then we format that into the LLM prompt.
Love the idea of the re-ranker. So wouldn't mind just double clicking a little bit on that.
Yep.
Would you, historically, have you been satisfied with what comes out of the box, like an offer from Cohere as an example, or do you actively observe the quality of the re-ranker and try to maybe tune your own model, or maybe tweak the prompting that goes into the re-ranker? How do you gauge the quality and improve it for your application?
Yeah, evals is a really hard thing because it's really so specific to the customer's data. And a lot of times, I think what we've seen is, we try and make it easy enough that you don't really have to do anything, and you get good, that kind of 80-20, like good enough result out without people having to mess with it. We haven't done really any fine tuning of embeddings or anything like that really. But we have seen that people can kind of tune like different re-ranking models and things like that. And so I think there's a couple places where we can give people that experience where they can, there's a couple that are like, okay, maybe they're law related or medical related. And so they're already fine tuned in that world. And then we can leverage that.
So I'm kind of curious about, I've seen on Twitter, I think I've said that multiple times this episode. I guess that's my whole source of information on AI now. But I heard about agentic RAG and how like that's a different way of doing things. And I see buzzword plus buzzword, and I'm like, that's the new thing. So I guess kind of a two-part question of like, what is agentic RAG, but also is it important / what is like the future of RAG? Like where are we headed? Like what in
Yeah.
the next year is going to be big for RAG?
I mean, agentic RAG is an interesting one. Like I look at it kind of the reverse of, I mean, a lot of people are talking about agentic RAG and how you can um, kind of have it go out and call tools and integrate with this. I mean, I would still say that's kind of RAG as part of an agentic workflow. And I mean, because really RAG is just one piece of the equation is, I mean, the work that we've done, like we have an agent tools library that works with Crew AI. And I mean, RAG is essentially a tool inside of the agent workflow. And I think other people are kind of almost saying, okay, well, can I, it's almost like run agents within the RAG pipeline as kind of tool flow. You could think of it outside in where it's really, I mean, kind of RAG within an agent workflow. Um, I think, I mean, it's kind of all just how you want to describe it, really. But really, I mean, the idea is the heavy lifting is really done by the tools in these LLMs that either data ingestion or um, adding RAG in, or I mean, just other kind of I don't know, go querying Slack messages in the channel or something like that. I mean, that is the tools that are actually doing that, not the LLM. And so I think it's, I mean, it's kind of all in the same realm. But I mean, we kind of look at it as like, hey, we're going to offer a bunch of tools that you can use in different agentic workflows. You can, one of those tools is RAG. Um, you want to call that agentic RAG? Sure. I mean, or you could just call it an agent that has access to a RAG tool. I kind of see it the same way.
Excellent. What type of issues have you found people encounter when building RAG systems that gives the benefit of going to a hosted or managed RAG service versus just spinning up your own and taking a whirl at yourself?
I mean, really what we've seen, I mean, one of the ideas is data security. And so, I mean, there's some realm of, okay, we need this 100% on-prem or in our own cloud infrastructure. It has to be open source. Like there could be restrictions based on the type of data and things like that. And for those customers, we just don't apply. Like that's just not, I mean, there's going to be other great products out there that they can build their own and spin up their own instance of Pinecone, spin up their own instance of a whatever, a NoSQL store and cloud storage and stuff like that. We're really looking at it as, look, I mean, if it fits your model of, hey, I mean, we run on Azure. We're already encrypted at RAS. We're providing a lot of the same data security because we're a managed infrastructure. Um, but and we actually even provision cloud storage per customer project. So we're even doing data partitioning at that level. But like I mean, our vector database is multi-tenant. I mean, and so we're not having a separate vector database per customer project. Um, I think, I mean, there's going to be some customers that fit that model, some customers that don't. But we're trying to find that sweet spot where, I mean, you could just sign up today, get an API key, and have RAG. I mean, literally in minutes, upload some data and ask questions over it. So I think for us, we're trying to make it super easy, super developer friendly, kind of following like the Supabase kind of model, but for kind of RAG and content management. Um, and I think that, I mean, we've kind of settled on this RAG as a service description these days, but it honestly, it does a lot more. And I think that's what we're starting to figure out. Okay, what does the market think they want in terms of a tool, a developer tool, and what kind of functionality do they need?
I think that's brilliant because like something that I've noticed building my own like RAG pipelines and things that is RAG is hard. I mean, there's
Mhm.
so many different tools, there's so many different vector databases and
Yep.
so many different ways of doing it, and it honestly gets overwhelming to some extent. And then I built this whole thing, and then I read about knowledge graphs, and it's like, oh
Yeah.
man, now I need to go implement Neo4j or whatever else
Right.
in
Right.
this and see how I can. So I totally get this like RAG as a service makes a lot of sense.
Well, I mean, a developer myself, if I was selecting Pinecone versus Qdrant versus, I don't know, Chroma, like pick, I mean, like another, or let's just say a PG vector for Postgres. It's like, how would I decide which one to use? And I mean, we've kind of gone the other direction where it's like, look, we've just integrated something that we know works well, it's performant. We use Azure AI Search and their vector support. And they have, I mean, it's for the customer, our developer customer, they don't really care. I mean, they don't care what's under the hood. It just has to work, and it has to be quick and find me the relevant data. And then, I mean, that's the part that we just want to make easy for people, because they just shouldn't have to think about this stuff. And I think I mean, as we're going to get into this year, I think we're starting to see more and more people be like, okay, I don't want to build this kind of data infrastructure product in addition to the product that I'm trying to already build. Like, if I could just use that as a service in the API, I mean, we've had people flip over to us in a day or two from an existing product and be like, oh, wow, okay, I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that. Like, I mean, this just works. And that's the experience we're trying to, I mean, really achieve.
This seems like a really good segue to do a quick demo. Would you mind showing us some
Yeah.
Graphlit?
Okay, so this is our developer portal, and what I'm showing here is you can create a project, and then we have a playground where you can directly upload data or crawl websites. And here I've put in a PDF deck and automatically extracted Markdown. We have a Markdown preview, and then the raw JSON we actually show where you can actually get access to this. So this is all done through our API, and this is one of the things that folks have been asking for, where we started out being very API first, saying, look, okay, you sign up, you get an API key. Like on our settings page here, you can get your organization ID and your API keys. And this is all you need to talk to our SDKs. But people are like, okay, well, but can I mean, actually chat with the data in the project, or can I crawl websites or things like that right in the application? And that's something we've just recently, this is our dev environment we're shipping next week. And this now gives folks the ability to get up and running quickly, try out the RAG process, upload data, and then they can start running with we have a Python, a TypeScript, and a .NET SDK. Yeah, so this is an example of a Google Colab notebook using one of our SDKs. So we have a Python SDK. In our GitHub, we have 50 or 60 different examples. And basically all you need to do is set up the environment variables for your project that I showed in the portal. You get your different keys here. And then you can directly call into our SDK to create workflows, which are kind of the instruction set of data as we pull it into the system. We can create a feed, which is pulling from a subreddit. So you can say, okay, limit to the first 50 Reddit posts and apply this workflow, which is going to extract organizations. So we talked about the knowledge graph. So we can automatically generate a knowledge graph from the data. And all you're doing is saying, okay, use this workflow to read from Reddit. And we'll just do that. And then basically this is just a loop to wait until the feed is done. And then right here, when I'd run this last, I actually then could do a search by basically the organization name, Google, and I was actually in the Anthropic subreddit, and it automatically found these Reddit posts. So this, I mean, as simple as this is, you're saying, go grab some data, process it, sort of an ETL process, and then you can search over it, you could have a conversation over it, and all of these different bits and pieces you can then take advantage of in your app.
I really do like the Suba-based kind of nature of this. It really is kind of that, you create a project, you can upload documents through the UI itself or through API. It makes a lot of sense. It's very backend as a service, RAG as a service, very attractive. For someone that uses Suba-based myself, it's very familiar.
I mean, there was definitely took inspiration, as you say, from that when we got started with the design, and it's evolving over time. But I think that was, when we first started, this was a lot simpler, where it's like, hey, here's your API key, here's our docs. And over the last year, it's really, because we basically pivoted to this 2 years ago and have just been kind of building up the developer portal functionality. And this is one of the areas, after getting things like logging in there, and then we obviously have billing, kind of having direct manipulation of the playground has then come the last 6 months. We've been adding a bunch of stuff in there.
Nice. Also helps just getting people iterating their idea quickly when they can have a playground to access to.
It's really important.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I've seen systems where maybe a restaurant puts their menu behind it, or some more straightforward, just like easy query ones. What type of interesting use cases have you seen using
I mean,
Graphlit?
we've seen kind of two sides of things. One is where it becomes kind of an engine, almost like a knowledge engine where people can push data into it, and then they're essentially just using the API to query the data or the knowledge graph, and they're not doing LLM integration at all. They're just, from a conversational point of view, they're just using it for data extraction and search. So there's kind of that bucket. Or people may be doing, they might be retrieving data from their own RAG pipeline. And so we're starting to see some folks that, just maybe had an existing implementation and they're saying, look, we just want the chunks, like, or we want the sources out. We're already calling the LLM ourselves. And then there's the flip side of fully automated conversations where they're building some kind of chat interface or integrating with agent tools, and they just want a fully managed service. And so we're kind of seeing it kind of almost, I guess you say, like an embedded model or sort of an application layer model, that we're seeing both sides of that.
Interesting. Okay, I have another question about knowledge graphs. So I'm curious what the advantages of knowledge graphs are. I mean, my extent of knowledge on knowledge graphs is like a Neo4j like sales pitch when I was at a conference, and so I was like, "Oh, this is cool," and I got to see their little UI showing the little clusters in space and things like that. But I don't truly understand like the real benefits of knowledge graphs. Can you explain that a little bit?
The biggest thing is it's all about relationships between things. And Google had a classic paper of like things, not strings. And it really just means of, you have people, you have places, you have companies, and you're extracting not just the word Microsoft, you're extracting, think of it in object-oriented ways. It's an object that has an ID and a name of Microsoft, and a type, which is organization. And so that's really what, the knowledge graph, part of it is you have to build it. So you have to extract that from the raw data that's coming in, which has to be parsed or transcribed from whatever source it is. So even to the point of building the knowledge graph, you have a couple steps. But then, how you consume that data, obviously visualizing it is a common thing, but it's really, what are you going to do with that? Just by sort of seeing a big graph is interesting, but it's maybe not as valuable. But what the other side that we started working on last year was GraphRag, where now it's become a bit more commonplace with Microsoft having a paper about it and different things. But we were kind of already there because we were saying, look, we have this context that if you've extracted these entities around your data, we can pull them into the RAG context. So when that prompt compiler we talked about, we can say, oh, well, here's the subgraph essentially related to all the sources that you've pulled in, throw that metadata into the prompt as well. And then how different is the LLM going to respond? That's a whole other topic, but I'll stop there.
With Graphlit going that direction, it definitely sounds more comprehensive. It provides a lot more contextual results.
Yeah.
Is there a certain threshold you imagine for the difficulty of implementing it versus the benefit? Should everyone just go this route right off the bat since it seems to be more robust, or is it a lot of overhead getting it set up?
I think, it's rare that you need something at that level of detail to really build it yourself these days. I think the models have commoditized enough that, we now support basically every model on the market. Supporting that yourself could be a pain, or you'd have to use something like a light LLM or Open Router to kind of have an abstraction layer over the models. And we provide that as well. I think, demos are easy. And I think that's the classic trope of, it's not hard to do the basic stuff, but then, okay, well, say I want to go pull in stuff from Google Drive. Now I have to think about authentication. I have to think about retries. I have to think about, I don't know, we had a bug last week where it's like it was giving back a null parent folder ID. And it's like, well, why is there no folder where the email was in? It's just like weird stuff like that you have to deal with every API you're integrating. And so it's like, okay, just integrate with us. We've already solved those problems. We've integrated with all these things. It's kind of like that Zapier approach or whatever, where you're just getting things to connect together. So I think at some point, if you're just chatting with a PDF, sure. You could whip that together in a Colab notebook with anything. But if you really need okay, go sweep a Google Drive and extract metadata from it and make it searchable and do republishing of that data into a summary message that get sent back every morning. Like that's the kind of stuff we can do in our end-to-end pipeline. And that's what I think, I mean, RAG as a service does undersell it. But I think the thing we're trying to figure out now is like, how do we describe that and all the other things we do? And even like OpenAI tasks or Notebook LLM from Google, we have those capabilities. I mean, for audio publishing or kind of what we call alerts, kind of, scheduled prompts against your data, like scheduled RAG prompts. But it's like, that's a lot to describe in one product. And so I think what we've been trying to do is, okay, focus on one thing, describe that. This is what we do well. And we happen to do these other things around it.
That's interesting. Yeah, the gulf between a demo and production is so big, and I noticed that in my own things too. Right, I built something and I show it to Mike. I'm like, look, I got it working, and it's this little demo.
Yep.
And it's like, yay! And then you really try to stress test it, and it breaks in ways you had no idea that it would break. And so this getting things to production is so much more difficult. Kind of makes me think of another question for you of like, do you have any advice just for like budding AI engineers that are going on building their own products, trying their own things, building great demos, but trying to get them into production? Do you have any like general advice for this new generation of builders out there?
I mean, I think we saw the LangChain, the Llama Index kind of wave of maybe 2 years ago. I mean, and I think in a positive sense, it exposed a lot more people to this kind of AI engineer concept. But I think it also brought with it a lot of, I mean, maybe unneeded extraction or abstractions of, I mean, things that maybe like you thought you needed to use LangChain to do things, but really you probably could have just used Python code for. And I think we're kind of seeing that in the agent space as well, where there's these new abstractions like Crew AI and AutoGen and like, I mean, there's agent framework popping up every week, but they're kind of all syntactic sugar around the same thing, which is workflow orchestration. And so, I mean, I'm kind of old enough to live through workflow orchestration in a previous life and I think it's underserved I think there's just basic software engineering in a lot of these cases, and understanding things like LM tokens, context window, stuff like that. You can get started pretty easily, but and just start building demos with some of these, I mean, frameworks that are out there. But I would suggest start small. I mean, try and use as little extra crust of open source projects getting started, just so you kind of understand the basics. But then when you're actually trying to build something, I would definitely use something like, I mean, obviously like us, but more like a light LM or some intermediate wrapper that like abstracts the models from you and just says, okay, I can call any model. I'm just passing a prompt. And I think that will save you time. You might not need to go all the way up to like, okay, I'm going to wrap it in a LangChain or a Llama Index or something like that.
In your day-to-day life or your work day, do you use any AI tools yourself? Is there anything to help accelerate your speed of development?
Yeah, I mean, I use, sort of just ChatGPT for coding. I mean, I've started to use GitHub Copilot a little bit more. I think it's harder. Like I don't do front end work, so I think for back end work, it's not as maybe useful in a lot of cases. But I mean, I think if I were a front end dev, I'd be using Cursor or D0 or any of these kind of windsurf as much. But I mean, definitely like it's such a time saver where I might have a little helper function that I might need to build, be like, okay, go parse this. I just had one last night, I think. Go parse this and grab the last segment of the URL. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I could do that. I've done it a million times, but why not just ask it? It'll give me it back in 5 seconds and copy paste it. And so it's like little stuff like that I tend to use it for. I don't think it's good enough yet for like larger refactoring or kind of more software architecture kind of issues like that. I don't even try. And I think for our code base, I mean, we use a lot of, it's a C# backend. And so I think it's not maybe what it's tuned for in a lot of this for like larger scale refactoring or different things like that. But I definitely take advantage of it when I can.
Yeah, these models are great at writing little one-off functions. Once you start combining 20 functions and trying to orchestrate it all, it kind of struggles there. So very
for sure.
functional based approach.
I mean, that's been my problem. I mean, but definitely, I mean, I'm probably doing something. Another story is I was coming up with a new project around agents and task orchestration. and leveraged O1 Pro for like a whole weekend. I sat there and kind of used it as a kind of a pair architect just to kind of bounce ideas off. And that worked actually really, really well. And so I kind of came up with a new concept of just, I mean, giving it maybe copy and pasting some websites or different things and came up with this new sort of architecture and flow. And it was, I mean, these reasoning models now with DeepSeek and all that, I think from a thinking things through kind of architecting kind of model, I mean, really encouraged to use them more.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, one last question for me is like lots of exciting things coming out in the AI space. January's been a crazy month of releases and launches. Is there anything you're most excited for in 2025 or anything that you're really looking forward to?
I mean, it's supposed to be today or tomorrow, but O3 Mini, I think from OpenAI, I don't know if it's already been released, but there's been a lot of rumors. I think what I see, here's one theory, and we'll see this if it's going to come out, is the agent frameworks today are essentially trying to abstract a prompted kind of request to like go do something and decompose that into tasks and then go execute it. And that's what everybody's trying to do with Crew AI and AutoGen, LangGraph, and stuff like that. What we've done some prototyping on is using a reasoning model to generate that sort of DAG style task graph and then execute it with a cheaper model. And I mean, it actually works really well. And you basically provided a list of tools and a user pros of, hey, I want to like create a report on blah, blah, blah. And it generates you an executable graph of steps. And the problem is it's not cheap and it's not that fast. But I'm really curious to run our tests with O3 Mini. If it's supposed to be GPT-4o speed and O1 reasoning quality, and that's where I think the world's going to change this year in terms of, I personally don't think maybe these agent frameworks are going to last very long because they're going to be replaced by a reasoning model that essentially is a compiler and a set of tools and an execution engine. And so that's really, I mean, I think that could be where things go. And so that's my theory. We'll see if that happens.
We'll follow up with you, but it seems like a good one. I wouldn't be surprised if that comes true. Just in regards or align with things in the future and whatnot, we're seeing tools like ScreenPipe come out where it'll record your screen, throw it through OCR, give some semantic reasoning. That type of thing could be added to RAG to help take video processing and not just be the transcript. Do you see anything else being added to RAG that might be impossible with current technology, but with the trajectory on might be possible soon?
I mean, I think the hard part about RAG to me is the sort of complex retrieval that of like, hey, like how many emails do I have? Like queries, mixing answers and almost sweet SQL-ish kind of queries, because it might be easy to be like, hey, go summarize all my emails from the last 7 days. But to ask them, how many emails do I have from Bob that mention blah is a query, not just a RAG request. And I think that, as well as how many pictures of Austin did I take that show tacos? I mean, and those kind of multimodal things I think are also very difficult. And you can do it in a sort of up, like if you already knew about it, but what if you hadn't analyzed those images for tacos before and it's at query time, you have to go analyze them. And I think that's where the agentic RAG term of like, it's almost like late bound indexing or like lazy indexing of data. So I think there's a bunch of use cases that are going to need more complex, both retrieval and indexing to achieve the goal. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the tuning kind of happen of like, okay, I have a specific thing, a type of vertical AI app that I'm building. I'm going to accept these types of questions. And that's where you really then need to tune the RAG pipeline. And that's where I could see people DIYing those approaches as well.
Man, fascinating. I could talk to you all day, but this is a great episode. I really appreciate you coming on. I feel like I've learned a lot, and now I'm sitting here thinking about how much time I put into my own RAG pipeline, thinking if I could rip that out and use Graphlit. Now, you got me thinking.
I think it's super interesting because I think we're starting to figure out, okay, what are the pieces that people want? And I think, sure, we can offer them the end-to-end, the full suite, But okay, maybe you just want to have a piece of it and say, okay, use us to ingest and then retrieve, but then you want to post-process that data. Like maybe you have your own re-ranker or integrate. Maybe you want to analyze the similar results and go grab some other stuff from another database or something like that. And so those kind of hooks are things that I'm really interested to see of like, that's where I hope the innovation comes is commoditize what's easily commoditized, but leave those hooks for things that's where it gets really interesting and pull in other data.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. Well, Kirk, before we let you go, anything you want the audience to know? Where can they find Graphlit?
Yeah, we're graphlit.com and Graphlit on Twitter. And then, yeah, I mean, definitely feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to chat. We have a Discord as well. You can hit from our website.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate it. It was fun.